What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home here at fakepigskin.com. I am your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. Joining me tonight to help break down the Week 6 waiver wire claims, players you need to be adding this week. It's Brian Twining. What's up, Brian?
What's going on, Kyle? It's a pretty melancholy Monday after my favorite team and their leader went down with a pretty gruesome injury yesterday. And luckily, they had the Red Rifle there to help them wind up on top with the assistance of two spectacular catches by our boy Michael Gallup. But, it was a pretty rough Sunday.
Yeah, we'll dive into that whole situation, help you figure out what to do with the players, help you figure out if Andy Dalton's worth your time. But yeah, it was a pretty rough weekend for you with the Yankees going out and Dak's foot disconnecting from his body. So if you're enjoying what we're doing, make sure you mash that thumbs up. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Make sure wherever you get our pods, if you're listening on the audio only version, make sure you rate it 5 stars or whatever Stitcher or Spotify do. But let's jump into it. Let's run through it and let's talk the Week 6 waiver wire. We'll start at running back, where there's still kind of some interesting names. I think the 4 that jumped out to us the most: Chase Edmonds, Damian Harris, Alexander Mattison, Jamal Williams. We've talked a lot of Edmonds, we talked a lot of Mattison. Obviously, Kenyon Drake has continued to not produce. Edmonds has been really good the past couple weeks. And we saw Dalvin Cook dealing with a groin injury. Supposedly he's fine, but Mattison's still worth your time. They're both pretty available in a lot of Yahoo leagues. But talk to me about Jamal Williams, because this is another guy that could be in a similar spot as Mattison, as Edmonds, and people are going to be flying to the waiver wire to add him if they're not adding him already.
Yeah, this was a situation that back when they had Mike McCarthy, you basically saw a 50-50 timeshare between Williams and Aaron Jones, which kind of began the hashtag Free Aaron Jones movement. Mm-hmm. And you've seen them kind of go more towards using AJ as the lead guy and sprinkling in Jamal Williams. But even with that being said, like he's still seeing plenty of playing time here, as he's had 6 or more carries in every game this year. He's had 2 games with 4 or more receptions, with last week actually having 8 receptions. They like to use him in the passing game, as he's more natural at receiving out of the backfield than Aaron Jones, even as good as Jones has been doing. But if Aaron Jones were to ever get injured, you would be looking at a guy who, even with A.J. Dillon back there, would probably likely see 75, 85% of the touches out of this number 1 offense in the NFL. So he needs to be rostered in more than 15% of leagues. Yep. And like immediately. So for me, this guy, if I'm further down the pecking order on the waiver list, I'm looking to place a claim on Jamal.
Yeah, or if you're looking at your team and you're really happy with your current running back slate and you're just looking for some depth pieces that you can sneak through on cheap fab buys, I think he makes a ton of sense there. And, this offense in general in Green Bay is going to be really interesting. Obviously, Davante Adams should be back this week. It sounded like he thought he might be healthy enough to play last week. Didn't end up getting the return. Robert Tonyan's a guy that vaulted in ownership, and I think rightfully so. It's very weird to think of Aaron Rodgers and a fantasy relevant tight end, but this is 2020, so on the scale of weird things in 2020, I think it's very low on the radar. But I will be curious to see how the return of Adams kind of affects everybody. Obviously, no Lazard for a while. MVS is still there. We'll see if Darius Shepard is still involved. So there's going to be opportunities in the passing game for somebody outside of Davante Adams. And I'm very curious to see if Jamal Williams and or Robert Tonyan can be a big part of it. But yes, especially with the rash of injuries to running backs. And he's somebody that if you can afford to hold him on the back of your bench and wait and see, I would do that. I would be picking at Mattison first and Edmonds before that if you're looking as pure handcuff situations. If you need somebody to start, Damian Harris is absolutely worth your time and worth your fab dollars or that waiver priority. In a game where they had terrible quarterback play between Brian Hoyer and Jarrett Stidham. 17 carries, 100 yards, almost 6 yards a carry. Looked really good.
Yes, he did.
For a guy that we've kind of been waiting for this to happen. You know, the Sony Michel thing never really came to fruition. And when Cam is back, this is an offense that's going to be a lot more open to the, you know, there'll be more running lanes, there'll be more opportunities when you're not looking at, you know, Brian Hoyer standing back there or Jarrett Stidham throwing pick sixes. Rex Burkhead will still be involved. James White will still be involved. But I could see those guys kind of splitting the ancillary touches, with Burkhead getting a little more of the ground game, while White's getting more of the PPR action. But I think Damian Williams is legit and worthy of your time. And if you're kind of scrambling at running back due to injuries or COVID or just being patient at the position, I think he's worth a look this week, and somebody that I would be looking to scoop up.
Yeah, I love Damian Harris's role in this offense here. The one thing that I will say about him, though, is that he saw no targets last week, and that would be my one worry. If I'm in a full PPR league, he'd probably lose a few spots on the order, because in this offense that has both Rex Burkhead and James White, more than likely he's not going to be seeing any targets. Yep,
so, he's not a passing down guy, so if you're looking for that safe floor, he's not your option. But if you're in half or no PPR leagues, I would highly look at him. Let's talk receivers. Obviously, the name everyone's going to be talking about today is Chase Claypool, and with good reason. He was an absolute beast. Deontay Johnson got hurt again. I don't know if it's going to happen. James Washington, we'll see, kind of pops up. I still think Juju is really good, but definitely hasn't become the guy yet. But this was a nice spot. Obviously, 11 targets, so Big Ben looked his way constantly. 7 catches, 110 yards, 3 touchdowns. Also had a handoff for a touchdown, so a big 4-touchdown day. But this was a guy that, was starting to get a little bit of work even in an offense that was loaded at receiver. Had 88 yards and a touchdown against Denver. I believe that was also a Deontay Johnson-less game, if I remember correctly. So it seems like he kind of is that clear second option opposite Juju. And if Deontay is out for a while, I think he's going to be interesting. Outside of him, T. Higgins and Brandon Cooks, the young guy and the old guy, both guys we were excited about coming into the year, coming into the week, and both popped off in a big way. Do you want to talk about the rookie or the old man?
Let's lead off with the rookie, because I think a lot of people are going to misconstrue the production that he put up this week against that Baltimore Ravens defense as somebody that, he's not going to be as productive as what would warrant, a top flight waiver wire ad. But with the news that AJ Green has not only re-aggravated his hamstring injury, but there seems to be some sort of dissension between him and this organization again. Yep. And, there is a world where we see them ship him out, release him, just rid themselves of the problem. Yep. And in a game where Joe Burrow was held to his worst production yet as a rookie, T. Higgins still led the team in targets, had 4 receptions, over 60 yards, was, played like almost 90% of the snaps. Like, this dude is pretty much turned into 1B to Tyler Boyd in a pass-first offense in games that they're going to be trailing, and they're not going to be facing the Ravens every week.
Right, and Joe Burrow is going to play better. He had a bad game. This was probably coming for a rookie quarterback that is going to take his bumps and bruises along the way.
Or dude look like David Carr back there.
Yeah, and I think, I think there's a world where we see when Emmanuel Sanders got traded to the Niners for a second round pick. I could definitely see something like that in the next couple of weeks, where the Bengals say, fine, you go play for a contender. We'll take a 3rd rounder or even a 4th rounder. And they have plenty of receiving talent, with even as much as John Ross and Auden Tate really haven't done a lot. If those are your 3 and 4 to go with Boyd and Higgins, I think you're going to be good in a team that's looking to get younger and built for the future. So I'm rostering him as well, 53%. The old man Cooks is going to pop up and kind of go away. We'll see what the Romeo Crennel version of this team looks like. What if Houston was a blip this week against Jacksonville, or if it's something more. Obviously, I was incredibly optimistic about him coming into the year. I thought he could be awesome. We've seen 2 good games. We saw Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks have a good game, which is something we hadn't seen yet. So that was very exciting. So yeah, I think, and then Henry Ruggs is worth your time. This is his first game back after dealing with the injuries. 5 targets against the Panthers, 3 against New Orleans, 3 against KC. KC, 118 yards, a touchdown. This is a super explosive receiver that looks to be more than just the Ted Ginn, John Ross.
He looks like Deshaun Jackson to me.
Yeah, he looks like he's a speedster, but he looks more refined. He looks legit. He looks like the Raiders might have had a good first-round pick, which is pretty shocking for the Raiders.
Yes.
And maybe it has a lot to do with the guy we're going to talk about here in a second, in Derek Carr. But he looks legit. There's the team that needs receiving help, and obviously Darren Waller is doing a lot. But outside of that, they don't. They're kind of waiting for pieces to emerge from the pile of receivers that they've kind of cobbled together. I think Henry Ruggs is worth taking a look at. A guy that maybe he's going to cost a little more in Fab just because of that big game. And you're going to look at his numbers and be like, I don't know. So Brian, if you're digging receivers, you need a receiver help this week. Who's your 1, 2, and 3 options at the position?
Honestly, I'm going to go T. Higgins, number 1. He's had the most consistent season thus far, and with the injury to AJ Green, I like his outlook going forward. I would probably lean Henry Ruggs, number 2, just because he can blow the top off the roof. And this is an offense, too, that doesn't really have any other options on the outside right now. And I think when Bryan Edwards returns, I think that opens the field up even more for Ruggs. And then Claypool, 3, and then Cooks, only because we don't really know yet what this offense will look like against decent opponents. Deshaun Watson does have a propensity to change from game to game which guy he's going to target. But all 4 of these guys, for me, they should be rostered in 100% of leagues, whether they're just chilling at the end of your bench or as a wide receiver 3 flex play.
Yeah, I think Cooks and Fuller are both incredibly interesting, and Cooks is a guy that if you want to kind of just add him, if you have a low waiver priority, if you're looking for a little receiver help, I think it makes sense. I'm with you. I think Higgins is number 1. I trust his week-to-week volume. I trust that offense to throw a lot. Ruggs would be my number 2. And I didn't think I'd be really excited about a pass catcher with Derek Carr besides Darren Waller, but here we are. Yep. And Claypool is 3, and I like Claypool a lot. And if you believe in him and you want to go for it, I get it. I just have concerns about what it looks like when Deontay Johnson and James Washington and Juju are out there. Eric Ebron's still part of this offense. We'll talk about him when we talk about tight ends.
Still has his butterfingers.
And they still have James Conner running the ball. So as much as I like what he did, as much as I think he's awesome and a guy that if I'm in Dynasty, like maybe the window's closed, but I would be much more interested him in there if you can get him at a decent price. Let's talk quarterbacks and let's talk about Mr. Derek Carr. This dude is having a monster season that nobody is paying attention to. I'm pulling up his numbers right now, but this guy basically has been like super efficient, going for 300 yards with nobody on there. Let me see here. Yeah, so if we go, he obviously 347 and 3 touchdowns against Kansas City, 311 and 2 against Buffalo, 261 and 2, 284 and 3, 239 and 1. The Carolina game was his worst by far.
And that was when Carolina was completely healthy, and that defense has played a lot better than we had anticipated as well.
Yeah, so and I don't want to jinx it, but Derek Carr going into his week 6 bye only has 1 interception. And has 11 touchdowns, 1 pick. He's basically Joe Flacco right now. He's playoff elite Joe Flacco. As I mentioned, the Raiders are going into a bye. So if you need a quarterback for this week, he's not your guy. But coming out of the bye, they have Tampa, at Cleveland, at the Chargers, home for Denver, Kansas City again, at Atlanta, at the Jets, Indianapolis. Like, that's a nice schedule heading into the fantasy playoffs when you're going to get the Chargers, the Dolphins, and potentially at Denver if you play into week 17. He sets up really nicely in an offense that's clearly throwing the ball, even with Josh Jacobs and surprisingly a lot of Devontae Booker. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I didn't get that.
But he is absolutely worth your time. Brian, let's talk about your Cowboys for a second. Obviously, Dak's out. We'll see you in 2021, maybe in Dallas, maybe somewhere else. We'll see.
I sure as hell hope they re-sign him.
Andy Dalton is your quarterback the rest of the way. If you're a Amari Cooper fan, or if you're rostering Amari Cooper, Dalton Schultz, CeeDee Lamb, even Michael Gallup, even Ezekiel Elliott, like that, obviously he's not Dak Prescott, but he's still good enough to make this offense click and hum and potentially be a guy that if you need a streaming option on a week-to-week basis is incredibly appealing.
Yeah, I think there are some better options just because, I mean, he's a backup. Like, you're not a backup in the NFL for no reason other than you're not as good as the starter or the other starters in the league.
Okay.
And even though he has a ton of weapons, like I would prefer to have a Derek Carr or even a Ryan Tannehill.
Okay, let me throw out some names for you. Would you take Andy Dalton or would you take Gardner Minshew?
I'd probably take Dalton in that situation.
Would you take Andy Dalton or Teddy Bridgewater?
Teddy Bridgewater.
Would you take Andy Dalton or Justin Herbert?
Ooh. Man, I might lean Herbert just with the rushing upside.
Would you take Andy Dalton or Baker Mayfield?
Oh, Andy Dalton.
Set you up for that one.
I hate Baker Mayfield. He's terrible.
Andy Dalton or Kirk Cousins? Which, mind you, outside of the Indy game, has gone 259-2, 251-3, 260-1, 249-2. Always obviously throws picks. So if you're in leagues where that kills you, then he's not somebody that I'm going after. But
let's see here. The Cowboys schedule, blah blah. I'm probably taking Kirk Cousins.
Cousins has Atlanta this week, which is obviously incredibly appealing. Then the bye week. Then at Green Bay, Detroit, at Chicago, Dallas, Carolina.
Yeah, taking Cousins.
Some nice matchups in there for sure. But Andy Dalton, like, at minimum, he's not going to kill any of your other fantasy assets. At maximum, you're going to look for some decent matchups versus the Giants, other poor secondaries. I think he's going to be a guy that will be worth your time if you're looking, especially if you're in a deeper league where maybe you didn't, where people roster a couple of quarterbacks and there's not a lot of players available on the waiver wire. Let's talk tight ends really quick before we get out of here and try and keep this thing under 20 minutes. The tight end position is gross if you don't have Travis Kelce or George Kittle or Mark Andrews or Darren Waller. Honestly, those four have been so solid. Beyond them, like I don't feel good. Like we talked about Eric Ebron, back-to-back 5-catch games. Austin Hooper saw 10 targets against Indy, only caught 5 for 57, which isn't great.
I think that was more a product of the way that Indianapolis was funneling the targets to the tight ends with how good their DBs are.
But he had seen 7 against Dallas and 4 against Washington, so there's a clear progression there. No Njoku, there's more opportunities for him to see volume. But like I said, if you're getting down this low, like you don't feel good. Like Greg Olson's a name. He saw 13 targets before last night's game, which he only saw 1 target, but he had 13, caught 10 of them, 61 and 35 yards. Like this is what we're talking about. Mo Alley Cox, by the way, like isn't running enough routes to be worth your time. Like if he catches a touchdown, then great. But he's gone 3 targets, 2 targets, 1 target with the return of Trey Burton, with Jack Doyle being involved. There's just too many games and too many names, and Patrick and Phil Rivers is just like awful. I was so wrong about that. Like
he looks horrible.
If there was one thing I wish I could go back and clean up from the preseason is like my weird infatuation with Philip Rivers. Like I thought things would be better. I thought the offensive line would be better. If the game script is great and they're doing well, he's awesome. And when things get bad or they're down, he's terrible. And from a betting perspective, especially, like, I'm going to be all over betting him in the playoffs, because if that game gets sideways at all, it's chuck and duck, and that's Phil Rivers.
That was one of the reasons why the Browns were one of my favorite DFS defenses yesterday, just because his likelihood of throwing an interception, or how he's so immobile, and he tends to fumble a lot when guys get at his feet, and it's just a situation where Indianapolis, they're going to have to either be extremely close in games and or be in the lead for them to be productive on the offensive side of the ball, because Philip Rivers is just not going to be able to lead them from behind anymore.
Yep. I totally agree. All right, Brian, this was a lot of fun. We hit a bunch of names. If you have more questions, if you have, help with your fab, obviously I drop a waiver wire article on Fake Pigskin every single Tuesday. But you can also hit us up on Twitter at Notorious KRO, at Greasy Rules 14, at FPAOP. And we're here every Sunday morning helping get you set for the each and every week, starting at 11:30 Eastern. We're usually on for 45 minutes to an hour. If you come on, you bring more questions, we stay on longer. That's how it works. So bring your questions, bring your thoughts. For Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you.